Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here.
In Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence, he included a vilification of King George III for creating and sustaining the slave trade. Jefferson's fellow Southern delegates were unwilling to include that provision in the final draft, and they also opposed black soldiers fighting for the Patriot cause. During the war, the number of blacks serving in the British forces is estimated to be in the tens of thousands. On the other hand, only about 5,000 served in the Continental Army or state militias. These came mostly from northern states. Writing in 1890, Joseph T. Wilson noted,
"The love of liberty was no less strong with the Southern than with the Northern colored man, as their efforts for liberty show. At the North, he gained his freedom by entering the American Army. At the South, only by entering the British Army, which was joined by more than 15,000 colored men." Jefferson says 30,000 Negroes from Virginia alone went to the British Army. I make the digression simply to assert that had the colored men at the South possessed the same opportunity as those at the North of enlisting in the American Army, a large force of colored men would have been in the field fighting for America's independence.
Nevertheless, thousands of blacks did fight in the American forces. This was not an entirely new concept. Though regulations had prevented slaves and free blacks from joining the militia, these rules tended to be ignored during time of war. Black soldiers, free and slave, had served in the French and Indian War and other past colonial conflicts. They served as soldiers, scouts, sailors, and workers, and not in all black units. They served next to white soldiers, generally for the same pay. In 1775, blacks were serving in northern militias, and black militiamen fought at Lexington and Concord. And one of those heroes of the Battle of Bunker Hill was the freed slave Peter Salem. Peter Salem, the black hero of Bunker Hill, was a member of the Framingham militia, where he served for the full 7 years of the war. He was presented to General Washington in recognition of his bravery in battle. But many Southern leaders could not tolerate the idea of black men in arms. Edward Rutledge, a congressional delegate from South Carolina, demanded that all slaves and free blacks be discharged from the Continental Army. His motion was defeated, but the Continental Congress agreed to instruct Washington to take on no more black recruits. When George Washington took command of the Continental Army in Boston in July 1775, he instructed the recruiting officers to not enlist any Negro or any person who was not American-born. However, as historian George Bancroft wrote in his 1889 History of the United States,
"The role of the Army at Cambridge had, from its first formation, borne the names of men of color, but as yet without legislative approval."
Approved or not, black soldiers were serving, and Washington had no desire to see them go. After Lord Dunmore's proclamation in November 1775, Washington resolved to go back to Congress and request permission to recruit free blacks. Washington received word that the free Negroes who had served faithfully in the Army at Cambridge may be re-enlisted therein, but no others. But the Patriots needed men-at-arms, whatever their color. By early 1777, Washington was ready to allow the recruitment of free blacks. One witness to the use of free and enslaved black men during the war was a Hessian officer serving the British. He wrote in October 1777,
"The Negro can take the field instead of his master, and therefore no regiment is to be seen in which there are not Negroes in abundance, and among them are able-bodied, strong, and brave fellows."
But though that officer may have seen many black soldiers and surmised that some were slaves serving in the place of their masters, officially, the Continental Army was only taking free blacks. And even opening the ranks to free blacks did not bring in enough men. Black soldiers were among those half-starved and half-frozen patriots in the bitter Valley Forge winter of 1777 through 78. But the overall numbers were still too low for comfort. In January of 78, General J.M. Varnum presented to Washington a plan for raising 2 battalions of black soldiers in Rhode Island. Washington passed the idea along to the Rhode Island governor, who proposed it to the legislature. The legislature responded,
"It is voted and resolved that every able-bodied Negro, mulatto, or Indian man slave in this state may enlist into either of the said 2 battalions to serve during the continuance of the present war with Great Britain. That every slave so enlisting shall be entitled to and receive all the bounties, wages, and encouragements allowed by the Continental Congress to any soldier enlisting in their service. It is further voted and resolved that every slave so enlisting shall, upon his passing muster, be immediately discharged from the service of his master or mistress and be absolutely free, as though he had never been encumbered with any kind of servitude or slavery."
Rhode Island even resolved that slaves should be freed, but those who became too sick to fight would still be free and would be supported at the expense of the state. Slave owners would be compensated for their loss of property. Eventually, the 1st Regiment of Rhode Island would have over 200 fighting men. They fought under Colonel Greene at the Battle of Rhode Island and were praised for their bravery and determination. Other northern states followed Rhode Island's lead, but southern states were reluctant. The Continental Congress tried to spur Georgia and South Carolina to raise an army of slaves to be commanded by white officers. Congress would compensate the masters for each slave, and the slaves would receive freedom at the end of the war. They refused. Other than Georgia and the Carolinas, the southern states did contribute black soldiers to the Patriot cause. But despite having a much higher African American population, they managed many fewer black recruits. Although southern states provided few black soldiers, they provided a significant number of black sailors. Neither the Continental Congress nor any individual state legislature forbade blacks serving in the Navy. The American Revolutionary War came to a head at the Siege of Yorktown, Virginia, in October 1781. And as they had been throughout the war, black soldiers were there on both sides of the conflict. American forces had been battling British General Cornwallis in Virginia since May. The Marquis de Lafayette shadowed Cornwallis's army, keeping just out of arm's reach. He was aided in this effort by the slave James Armistead from New Kent County, Virginia. Armistead had been given leave from his master to be Lafayette's servant. The Marquis instead turned him into a spy. In July, Armistead was hired by Cornwallis to report on the American forces. But Armistead was a double agent, keeping the Americans and their French allies informed of British plans, including Cornwallis's building of fortifications in Yorktown. Lafayette passed word to Washington, and Washington moved his army down from the north to confront Cornwallis. The Rhode Island Regiment participated in the siege of Yorktown. They served with Major General Benjamin Lincoln's division. The regiment, with over 4,000 other patriots, dug the first parallel on the evening of October 6th, less than 600 yards from the enemy. A portion of the regiment was joined with Lafayette's light infantry. and they would have witnessed Cornwallis's surrender on October 19, 1781. With the surrender of Cornwallis, support in England for the war plummeted. Control of Parliament shifted to the Peace Party, and major military activities in North America ended. A final peace treaty would be signed in Paris on September 3, 1783.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.